AlCore is pleased to welcome you all to today's webinar. AlCore is a global cloud advisory and implementation services company serving Fortune 500, government agencies, and other leading organizations in multiple industry verticals across the Americas, Canada, and India. AlCore is a ServiceNow Gold Services and Silver Sales partner. They also partner with Salesforce, FireI, Microsoft, Dell, Bomgar, and Big Panda, among others. They advise leading businesses on cloud platforms, architecture, enterprise service management, and integrating IT service delivery. They also provide business process consulting to capture, re-engineer, and improve processes that can easily be automated to deliver real value. The AlCore consulting team has excellence in business strategy, cloud technology, and organizational change management. Our ongoing webinar series is designed to inform, enlighten, and start discussions within your own organizations. If you require any additional information after listening to today's webinar, please reach out to us through our website, www.alcortech.com. Today's webinar is also on social media. You can follow, comment, and get regular updates for today's webinar with the hashtag Alcor webinar. That's hashtag or number sign ALCOR WEBINAR. We have time reserved at the end of the webinar for Q&A, so please feel free to type any questions into the questions section of your dashboard. Today's webinar topic is Vulnerability Response in ServiceNow, an overview and demo presented by Aleks Dmitrovic. Aleks is AlCore's Senior Vice President of AlCore Canada and is a results-focused strategic consultant and organizational leader with 20 years of experience, focused on driving strategic advisory, solution design, transformation, and operational excellence for customers and clients. Aleks is a certified ITIL v3 expert, Microsoft certified system engineer, and Cisco certified network administrator. I will now turn the webinar over to Aleks.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Nice introduction. So hi, folks. We're going to be talking about ServiceNow's Vulnerability Response. It's a part of ServiceNow's Security Operations Suite. Very excited to present today. And this is one webinar in an ongoing series of ServiceNow security webinars. So we'll just get right into it. For the folks who don't know who AlCore is, AlCore was founded in 2008. We have presence in a number of countries, a number of continents, offices in Los Angeles, California, San Francisco, Toronto, and Delhi, India. 500 plus projects under our belt, ton of great customers, and a ton of great employees on the team. We have some very strong partnerships with ServiceNow, Gold Services partner. I believe we're actually going to be registered as a Gold sales partner as well shortly. Big Panda, MuleSoft, FireI on the security side of Microsoft. So we'll get right into it. To start the conversation, I want to talk about why do we want to have a conversation about vulnerability response and security operations in general. One of the first things that we look at is what CISO does, what that team does, and how much that team covers within an enterprise. And it's really no surprise that these folks have a tremendous amount of accountability, a tremendous amount of responsibility, and really a tough time managing all the volume of work that comes to them, just simply because of the importance of all that work. If we look at some of the key things that the security team in any organization looks after, we start with security operations, which is the day-to-day, managing threat prevention, managing threat detection, managing incident management in various tools, supporting and managing identity management, risk management, participating in legal and human resources, compliance audits, defining security architecture, participating in budget cycles, project delivery life cycle, business enablement. The list seems endless. With all these accountabilities and their responsibilities comes, as we understand, a lot of information. And one of the toughest things for the folks on the security teams is to be able to transcend that information and get to real relevant business information and technology information to be able to make decisions that are going to benefit both themselves as a team and the organization. So quite a busy group, as most of the folks on this call probably know. Most organizations have invested in a lot of security products, and it's a good thing. There's a couple of channels in the security space that these products fall into. They fall into detection, they fall into protection, they fall into monitoring. The challenge with all these tools, unfortunately, is that there's a lot of information, and most of these tools don't work that well with each other. Most of the folks who have access to these tools are very singular in focus. A lot of this information would benefit folks in the rest of the organization. And there's a real need to try to solidify and coordinate that information. And that's where ServiceNow comes in. When we look at all that information and all those responsibilities and accountabilities, what we're seeing is that organizations are struggling not only to find breaches, but they're struggling to stop them. And there's a real need for some proactive tools to be in place to support a quicker mean time to detection and mean time to resolution, mean time to containment, as represented here. So the numbers are coming down, which is fantastic for a number of reasons that we'll look at in a second, but they are pretty dramatic. On average, based on Ponemon Institute's research this year, it took respondents 191 days to spot a breach and 66 days to contain it. So any tool that could provide a more proactive, a more holistic view into this information is going to support the ongoing strategy of any security team in your organization. So what's that core problem here again? We've got a lot of tools, SIMs, firewalls, security endpoints, identity access management, threat intel, network security, a ton of security noise, and it's very difficult to deal with that volume. It's incredibly difficult to consolidate the information. It's incredibly difficult to understand the business impact of that, to have some standard consistent workflow, to be able to automate the remediation, and to be able to meet audit and regulatory requirements. So security teams are realistically drowning in thousands and thousands of events, and they just don't have enough people to be able to scale to meet that volume. So again, we look at all these tools. Great tools, they do a great job. Splunks, the McAfees, the Checkpoints, the Taniums, the Oktas, fantastic tools, fantastic products. But the challenge is because they all live in their own space, we tend to end up having this scenario where we have a ton of work being done on spreadsheets. We're consolidating information on decentralized spreadsheets. We're color coding them. There's the death by color coding, I think, is the key term here. And it's impossible for folks to really sort of have a meaningful approach to that. So what ServiceNow has done is introduce the Security Operations Suite. There's a number of pieces to this. Again, we're going to focus on vulnerability in our discussion today. But the suite covers a number of things. It covers security incident response based on NIST standard security incident response process. It covers threat analysis with the ability to connect to standard threat databases, both government and manufacturer. And in this case, it introduces vulnerability response to be able to proactively look at all of the things that we have in our environment, in our CMDB, and to be able to look at both manufacturer and industry information, and to determine proactively what items are vulnerable in our environment, and more specifically, what do we do about them? So if, as you can see here, we get vulnerability information brought in and centralized from various sources, whether it's Koalas bringing in information through their vulnerability scanning, or whether it's the CVE database that's bringing in information. We need to be able to not only consolidate that information, but able to look at it and define what the remediation steps are in order to proactively manage that risk and to mitigate the vulnerabilities on our existing infrastructure. So, to summarize what the current problem is that, yes, we definitely have a lot of tools out there that are going to go out and detect. They're going to give us a lot of information. But without a defined remediation tool and process in place, it provides limited value. Hence, the time to detect and the time to eliminate vulnerabilities and threats. Without a business service map, it's hard, in fact, it's impossible to prioritize the business impact. Without IT change management, you don't have a coordinated way to plan and prioritize remediation efforts. Without security incident response capabilities, you don't have the ability to run and detect broader breaches and to prevent those. Without orchestration, you don't have the ability to eliminate in an automated way those vulnerabilities. And without SLAs, you can't tell how well you're doing. And hence, the reason why ServiceNow has entered this market. For the longest time, there's been some really three traditional columns in the security field. Enforcement, great tools like Palo Alto Networks will build a wall between you and the bad guys. Detection to determine if anything has gotten through and to continually scan for that. And then visibility, tools like Splunk provide a tremendous amount of information. In fact, so much information that it's typically classified as white noise, but it's very valuable information. ServiceNow has entered the market in the response space, the detection and remediation. They don't purport to replace Palo Alto or FireI or Splunk. In fact, they embrace all of these technologies. They integrate very well with them to create a command and control around detection and remediation, to establish, first and foremost, a manual run book on how to respond to, in this case, vulnerabilities, and then hopefully longer term to be able to look at automating and really coordinating in a much more comprehensive fashion all of those, the remediation of those vulnerabilities before they become, frankly, security incidents. ServiceNow has really done a tremendous job. Some of the things that they introduced in recent versions: security incident response, vulnerability response, threat intelligence, combined with workflow, automation, orchestration, and deep IT integration on top of the ServiceNow platform, which allows you to do anomaly detection, predictive modeling, peer benchmarking, performance forecasting, and all the other tools that come out of the box. It's a very powerful tool and a new space in the security operations space. Security operations vulnerability in ServiceNow specifically integrates with the National Vulnerability Database, integrates with third-party integrations such as Koalas, allows you to prioritize those vulnerable items. It allows you to automate patching and remediation of those vulnerable items. It allows you to seamlessly integrate with incident response, change, and problem to both proactively ensure that these don't become security issues, and to prioritize your work so that you're focusing on things that have the highest business value. Some of the security products that ServiceNow integrates with out of the box: Splunk, Koalas, QRadar, Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, all well-known brands in the security market. This list continues to grow, and there's the ability to do much more than just that. So if we break down ServiceNow security operations, the ecosystem, we look at detection tools, we look at SIMs, we look at vulnerability products, we look at threat intelligence products, seamlessly coming into ServiceNow, aligning to the CMDB, which is a representation of your infrastructure, leveraging workflows, leveraging automation, leveraging the bidirectional integrations as necessary to really drive ultimately the automated runbook of remediation of these vulnerable items within your organization. So it's pretty comprehensive, and it's pretty exciting for folks who deal with this day to day and have had to work with hundreds and thousands of spreadsheets, especially after a weekend like Black Friday. A lot of our customers who work in the e-commerce space have been very busy. They're definitely leveraging ServiceNow to help cut through the white noise and get to things that are really important. When we look at the security operations maturity model, a lot of organizations, as we mentioned, have a lot of great tools, but they don't have a lot of great tools in the remediation space. And as such, a lot of the folks are, the customers that we deal with are at the very sort of beginning of this maturity journey in the security operations space, doing a lot of work on spreadsheets, doing a lot of manual and visual investigation of information based on knowledge that they've attained over the years, rather than having to be able to look at industry information to align themselves. And as time goes by, with the addition of things like ServiceNow, we're able to do some security incident tracking outside of traditional incident, outside of spreadsheets, to have a common language for vulnerability and security response that is specific to those areas, to be able to do align that to our IT assets and our organizational assets, and then to be able to start to automate that conversation, and to be able to ultimately drive a lot more volume of response with a lot less overhead, human overhead. You never can eliminate the need for human beings in this scenario. It just enriches your ability to do more with based on the volume of information that's coming through. Similarly, on the vulnerability management scale, a lot of organizations have very little vulnerability scanning, or are doing it very manually. Patching really happens based either on manufacturer guidance or on best efforts. And what we start to see is, with the introduction of better and better scanning products, better information from both the community and from the security community and the government databases, we're able to leverage information that helps us define risk, helps us to prioritize through analytics, and eventually really be proactive so that we are one step ahead of threats and one step ahead of our having to remediate something that could both have legal, financial, and PR ramifications. So a couple ways that that's done in ServiceNow. Again, as we mentioned, if we get to the point where we have a security incident, we typically are at the point where a vulnerability has been used, a threat has been attached to it, and someone is actively trying to steal our data or take our data. The Security incident response application in ServiceNow, the process, driven by the NIST standards, is using language that is very specific to security. So security folks love these applications. This is not generic. This is very specific to them. We're talking about categories and subcategories that are specific to security. We're looking at doing assessments, assigning tasks, looking at the impact of impacted services, and it really helps us to drive a more meaningful conversation. The applications in security space within ServiceNow are what we call scoped applications. So only folks in the security team or folks that you want to be able to see some of these records will see these records. Traditional IT help desk, service desk wouldn't get access to these kinds of records. And as such, there's a real containment of sensitive information as well as the ability to share the information that you do want to share. When we look at severity, we see a lot of information coming through systems like Koalas, and Koalas will provide impact and severity calculations based on the way that it's configured. But when the information comes into ServiceNow, not only does it revisit the severity calculations from Koalas, but it has the ability to look at risk based on a number of factors, whether it's sensitive information, whether it's a high priority service, and is able to reprioritize the risk and the severity of that vulnerability. And as such, we have the ability to leverage automated workflows to drive out the execution of the remediation based on real-time business information. So when we look at, for example, here, we have a vulnerability security breach for a specific load balancer. Leveraging Service Watch and Service Mapping in ServiceNow, we're able to understand the mission criticality of the underlying infrastructure. We're able to patch specific parts of the system and all or some of them. We're able to much better understand the impact upstream and downstream of that security breach, and we're able to really determine the criticality and the speed to which that needs to be remediated or looked at. So a much more comprehensive view from a business perspective that we don't get with tools like Koalas on its own. The result of that information comes in the background. Workflows are kicking out when we look at, for example, here, depending on the nature of the issue, we can initiate a rescan of an endpoint. We can define whether it's sensitive data. We can automatically remove or update or patch a system depending on the type of workflow. And we're able to, without having folks need to look up or determine the course of action, we're able to define some standard remediation actions based on input from various sources, and also go back out to those sources of information, ask for more data, enrich that data in order to get to a point where you can make a decision and ultimately remediate any high priority vulnerabilities, as is the case here. So service level management, again, every security incident type or vulnerability can have its own service level. So depending on the type of vulnerability, the impacted service, the day of the week, quite frankly, if you needed to, you'd have the ability to match conditions, establish service levels, and initiate workflows that would remediate those priority issues in line with standards established in your organization, without having to look up and understand all of that information. And finally, you know, the end goal of all of this down the road is to have orchestration, the ability to install patches, remove viruses, change configurations, turn off firewall ports, you name it. An automated runbook in the remediation space and security is a big deal. It's a game changer, and we're seeing a lot of movement in this what's on ServiceNow. And one of the last parts here, which is I think equally important, especially in the security space, is the ability to provide audit information, post-incident reviews, post-mortems, to ensure all the appropriate steps have been taken, especially if you're looking at data breaches, if you're looking at financial information breaches. You're able to meet audit requirements and to be able to do this in a seamless way to show that the controls that are in place are being met. Attestation can be done automatically. And again, with the integration of risk management and governance, risk, and compliance applications in ServiceNow, you can take this even further. And then final step here is to share information, the development of standard knowledge, manual run books, and any information that'll provide folks the ability to engage the security team in a much more meaningful way, and provide the folks on the security team the ability to really do your jobs in a much more meaningful way. And the last thing here is the ability to publish a security service catalog. The toughest thing for any security professional is to take information that's incomplete. By driving things towards a security service catalog, we're able to publish the kinds of information and the kinds of data that need to be collected so that folks can submit it and it can automatically kick out, get assigned to the appropriate group, and workflows are driven to provide, again, execution and remediation of those vulnerabilities. Great. And I think one of the most important things is the ability here, high level, to be able to look at management dashboards, executive dashboards, broken down by the types of vulnerabilities, the classes of vulnerabilities, SLAs, business services, and it really just compartmentalizes and helps you prioritize your work so that you're focused on the true value add. The white noise gets put to the side. It gets managed, but it gets put to the side until you're able to focus in on the key priorities in your organization. Right. So I'm just going to pull up ServiceNow here. When we look at vulnerability in ServiceNow, as we were talking about, we're able to import vulnerability information from various sources. We can pull it in from Common Weaknesses Enumeration website. NIST publishes their National Vulnerability Database. So we integrate with ServiceNow and these third-party sources to pull in all the information that we need. And as we look at these, what this information gives us is industry information that's known by manufacturers, that's known by government, legal, financial. It gives us the information and what the potential solutions are. In addition, what it's doing is allowing us to connect to and determine what are the vulnerable items in our system, what's the impact of them, and what's the best way to approach this. And as we import this data and we scan, leveraging third-party tools like Koalas, we're able to match up a vulnerability to information from the vulnerability item database. It gives us the opportunity to classify and to drive the prioritization and severity of that, which in turn gives us the ability to define what to do in that scenario. Give you a quick overview here of security operations in general in ServiceNow. One of the first things we do in vulnerability is leverage a third-party integration. In this case, we could either do Splunk or we can use Koalas. Fairly straightforward to configure. We have the ability to define how much information, how often, and what to do with it. Once that information comes in, we have the ability to leverage standard security workflows. Very comprehensive stuff. If we look at, for example, confidential data exposure, pre-built templates that you can leverage as just that as a template. You have the ability to expand on those based on what's important to you folks. You can leverage it out of the box. It's pretty good. And what happens is as we generate new vulnerable items, we're able to prioritize, we're able to assign a severity, and we're able to assign a standard workflow to remediate that based on the information that's provided to us. So as I mentioned, there's the National Vulnerability Database. We'll take a look at this one, for example. We have vulnerability score, access vectors, access complexity. We're able to see how many software titles in our organization are impacted by this vulnerability. We're able to look at some details and references to determine what course of action to take. And when we go out and scan and find these vulnerabilities, we're able to assign a course of remediation, which helps us to really get to proactively the things that are important in the organization. So that's it for me. I'm going to open it up to a couple questions. Jeff, do we have any questions?
We do. Thanks, Alex. So there are a few questions. I'll get to them in just a moment. As a reminder, please use the question section to ask a question on today's topic. So if you're ready, Alex, here we go. Are customers actually using vulnerability response to help update their CMDBs?
Absolutely. That's actually a funny one. So we've done a lot of CMDB projects, and part of the projects have been implementations with Koalas, and we also do some implementations for vulnerability. And what we're finding is that tools like Koalas vulnerability tools typically have a good source of information on all the endpoints out in our organization. So what we're able to do is not only enhance our CMDB with things that maybe we wouldn't have been able to find. So, if you're leveraging ServiceNow's discovery, there's a whole bunch of things that you can find. But tools like Koalas have are able to find things that aren't necessarily in the same scope as ServiceNow's discoveries. So it only enhances that information. It actually adds some more context to it. And what we find is that the CMDB gets enriched. And with that, we're able to also do a lot better vulnerability response because we can see the impact to other things in the organization. That's a good question.
Okay, cool. Thanks. What tables are leveraged in automating the investigation and remediation workflow runbook?
That's a great question too. So I'll show you real quick here. Let me. So when we create a vulnerable item, first thing that we're going to be doing is referencing a configuration item or an endpoint. Typically, if it's coming from a tool like Koalas, you're going to have the endpoint or the configuration item, and that's going to give you. And we'll pick something here just for fun. Let's just look that up. Pick one that's in here. Invalid reference, great. When I'm going to go ahead and submit this, and what you'll see down at the bottom here, we're going to have the ability to not only leverage Koalas information, but the remediation tasks are going to be just that. They're tasks. So when we assign either whether it's security, incidents, whether we're assigning security incident response tasks or we're assigning vulnerability tasks to folks, it's the same way that it is with anything else in the system. It's leveraging the task table. What we're able to do within ServiceNow is create a number of different roles, depending on your role in the process itself. So if we look at, as an example, HR or legal or even external organizations like the police, you're able to create a task, allow those folks to log in with their roles and only see the information they need to be able to see. But it's all driven based on the base platform as we discussed in the diagram over here. Hope that makes sense.
Okay. If it doesn't, please ask a follow-up question. So what do I do if I don't have Koalas?
That's another great question. So you don't necessarily have to have Koalas. You don't have to have event management, although those tools have very specific functions and they're really good at what they do. So one of the key, two parts of that question, I guess, really is, can you live without Koalas? Sure. You can do, if you look at security, we can do email processing really easily, where we're able to parse data from various sources, create records from that, leveraging very simple integration, which drives the same sort of response. But with Koalas, you have the ability to extend that functionality and to not only get information coming in from Koalas, but also be able to communicate with Koalas and ask it to go and give you more information, rescan to validate information, all kinds of things that there's real value there. So, ServiceNow is pretty picky about who they integrate with. This list of integrations is definitely growing, but it's definitely not growing sort of without some serious thought.
Okay. So here's a related question. How does the FireI2 ServiceNow integration work?
So there is no direct FireI integration built into ServiceNow. So like any other integration, we really have a couple of ways to do that. Number one is a REST API, which we can connect to. Most sources publish a REST API to access or consume data. We can have information being processed out of FireI into ServiceNow, as we mentioned, with the email parsing, or we can do a JDBC connection and query as required. But I suspect that as time goes by, if there isn't one soon, there probably will be shortly on the ServiceNow side. Okay,
great. Is this replacing internal tools?
I think ServiceNow is looking at this from two perspectives. Number one, it's aware of the fact that there are a tremendous amount of really strong tools in the security space. It would be next to impossible for ServiceNow to replace Carbon Black, Tanium, Juniper Networks. They are a very robust set of tools, and ServiceNow is frankly not in that space. The space they are in is in the remediation, detection and remediation space. It's a new vertical, it's a new channel. There are not a lot of products in that space, and ServiceNow, because it's already an enterprise tool, it contains your CMDB, service mapping, the ability to orchestrate activities in your infrastructure. It makes sense to embrace these tools in the other verticals, but to really own this one vertical, which I believe they are.
Okay. How is vulnerability different from the event management module?
Yep, great. So vulnerability is sort of theoretical in the sense that manufacturers are publishing information. So we go back to some of these sites here. So the National Vulnerability Database is publishing information constantly about manufacturers, different types of technology. Manufacturers are openly publishing this information and sharing it with NIST, with CWE, with CVE. And what that's allowing us to do is have a common sort of task force, if you will, in establishing as much information as possible around what it is, what the impact is, and how to fix it. Event management is a very one-sided thing. We've found something. It's either met a threshold or it's met a criteria, but it provides very little detail in terms of what that means to you as an organization or what that means to your infrastructure. So really two different things. And frankly, the other difference between vulnerability and things you're doing in your infrastructure today, it's not patch management. Patch management has a very specific function. Vulnerability has the ability to initiate patch management, but it really provides a level of understanding and prioritization of weaknesses in your infrastructure based on either software or hardware, and gives you an opportunity to determine what to do with it. And you don't necessarily have to fix all your vulnerabilities. So it's important to really to make a distinction across those tools. Okay. Another great question, though.
Okay. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this one. What are the price models for SecOps? SIR, VR is how much? SIR is how much? Threat intelligence and trusted circles.
Yeah, great question. I don't have that information at hand. I'd be happy to have somebody from our sales team reach out to folks with that information.
Okay, excellent. Okay, that looks like that is all of the questions on the dashboard. We'll just wait a couple seconds here if anyone's got another one coming up. Doesn't look like it. So, excellent. Well, thank you, Alex. Oh, can you trigger a patch management process from the output of the vulnerability report?
Absolutely. So if we look at, I'll just show you again some of the, sorry, I'm just, things are popping up that are not supposed to be popping up. There we go. So when we look at our vulnerabilities, open vulnerable items, there's a number of factors that are going to drive what happens specifically. Think here. I'll just talk through it. So a couple things are going to happen. When the vulnerable item is going to reference a configuration item or an endpoint, based on that, you can define a lot of logic in the system, and you can use a number of tools. You can leverage shell scripting, things that are native to the ServiceNow orchestration functionality, or you can leverage integration to third-party tools that are going to allow you to get the same results. So whether you're going to leverage ServiceNow and Chef or Puppet, whether you're going to use things that are native to Active Directory and Amazon, the ability to run and initiate patches, absolutely, and it's even better than that. It's able to determine what should be patched. So if as we said, if you have a number of vulnerable items up there, half of them are in a non-production environment, others are in a production environment, the system is smart enough to determine that you need to generate a change record, number one, and number two, initiate that patch depending on the priority, only on those systems that are high impact or high high priority. So you establish that chain of command, the intelligence, link to either native patching capabilities or integrated patching capabilities, and then you have the full life cycle as far as automated remediation.
All right.
Sense?
Makes sense.
Right.
All right. Okay, that's it. All right, well, thank you, Alex, and thank you, everyone, for joining. The recording of today's webinar will be available on our website, www.alcortech.com, and through our social networking sites. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and we will see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, folks.